You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have Michael Mammay back on the show with me. He's been on a couple of times in the past, and I'll put links to those shows in the show notes of this episode if you want to go back and listen to those. He had a trilogy that began with Planetside and Spaceside, and the third one was Colonyside, if I remember. Is that right, Michael?
That is correct.
Yeah, and he is with us today to talk about a brand new book, not in that series, that is one of the most fun books that you'll read this year. It's called The Misfit Soldier. I love this book. I know you will too. Welcome back to the show, Michael.
Hey, Hank. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Excited to have you back on the show. So, Michael, the last time we talked was a couple of years ago, and a little thing happened in 2020 that, has kind of caused everyone to have some interesting times. How has the writing life in the midst of a global pandemic affected you?
Yeah, it's been interesting. It kind of worked out okay for me, and I hate to even say that out loud because, I mean, obviously it's horrible that people have died, but just in my own life personally, in November of 2019, I informed the school where I worked that I would not be returning, that I was going to quit teaching to be a full-time writer. And that was pre-pandemic. And then March of 2020, everything happened. We went to, online school. I was finishing up Colonyside, writing Colonyside at the time. So really, I had already made the decision to detach from the world and become a hermit and write. And as it turned out, the timing on that was okay for me. Barring again that it's a horrible tragedy, and I'm not trying to make light of it.
Of course.
It didn't affect me personally that much at first. And then I got through writing this book. And the reason I quit the job, I was so stressed out. I was trying to do 2 full-time jobs. I was trying to do a huge edit on Colonyside, which needed a lot of work before it became the book that it is now. And I was doing that while we were transitioning, from teaching in person to online school. And, there was just a lot of stress. And then when my job ended, I was kind of relieved from that. And I really was able to just buckle down and do a lot of work on the Misfit Soldier. So that worked out well. And then it kind of caught up with me after that, I think. Just kind of the whole thing. And trying to write the next book, I was 4 months late delivering the next book, which comes out in July. So,
what conversations I've had with other people, writers are unique people in that most of us work from home already, or in some sort of an isolated office situation, and that you can have a whole career and not have a whole lot of interaction with other people, other than when it comes time to promote books and all of that sort of stuff, but the majority of the writer's life is kind of isolated already. But there's an interesting thing that happens when the rest of the world is going through the same thing that you're going through, and there's some interesting mental gymnastics that happen when that the rest of the world is locked down too. It's affected people in different ways.
Yeah, and also just the ability to not get out, and interact in the world. Maybe when you're locked down already doing your work, maybe some of your downtime is actually interacting with people and not being alone. So when that goes away, it affects everybody different. it certainly affected even in my own family. My wife and I. My wife is a complete extrovert, and this has been so hard on her. But because we're married and we've been married for a long time, and we're in a relationship, because it's hard on her, it changes how I deal with things too. And it changes how she deals with things, with me being more of an introvert to start with. So it's really complicated. And because it's complicated, you don't necessarily see it when it hits you. All of a sudden I was just behind on delivering this book, and I didn't really know why.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have shared similar experiences, Michael.
Yeah.
Your previous series, we touched on it a minute ago. The Planetside series was a trilogy, kind of this epic military sci-fi. Epic is the best word I can use to describe it. Such a fun series. But it definitely leaned into that military sci-fi nature. The new book, even though it's classified as military sci-fi, I definitely, my experience with it was this was so much of a fun adventure story, and of course it has the military SF elements to it. But how do you see the difference in the new book, compared to your previous trilogy? And I know your military background and all of that obviously has effect on the kinds of stories that you tell. But what was kind of the thought process going into this book, and how did you what was your vision that kind of set this book apart from your previous work?
Well, first off, thanks for saying it was fun. That's what I tried to write. It was fun to write. I was trying to do something different, but not totally different. Like enough the same where fans of my previous work were still going to, engage with it. But different enough, to bring a completely different feel to it. The two things that they have, the series and this book have, that are similar is they're both, in theory, military sci-fi, but they're not about the wars, right? Planetside, while it is military sci-fi and it's definitely set in there and there's a war going on, Planetside really a mystery. It's a missing person mystery where Butler has to go find this guy. And this book, while it's set in a military sci-fi, it's really a heist story. And I did want to approach it with younger characters because I think it lets me show a different side of the truth of the military, that there are all these people in the military who have all these different skills and different attitudes toward it. And, they bring their own personalities. And that's kind of what I wanted to do in this, was just do kind of an ensemble cast, lighter. Hopefully it reads a little bit lighter than some of the dark stuff in some of the previous books. And it was just more fun to write at this time. I loved writing the Planetside books. I love Carl Butler. But going into a pandemic, writing something funny isn't a bad way to go. Both from a personal standpoint and hopefully from an audience standpoint. Hopefully people will engage with this.
I love a heist story. That's one of my favorite things to read. And when I got this book and started digging into it and sort of, I didn't do a whole lot of reading about the book before I started reading it. So I was kind of surprised, as an author would kind of hope that readers will be, that when I got into it, to realize what the story was all about. And from that decision to do a bit of a tonal shift for this book, did you know from the beginning, that you wanted this to be a heist novel, and that there would be an ensemble cast, or was there a particular character that was really sticking out to you from the beginning?
Well, from the very beginning, it started off as Gas and Putty. Okay, those two characters. I wrote a piece of flash fiction that was like 300 words long back in 2016 or something. that was these two characters just having a just bantering with each other. And it was actually the scene made the book. The whole book. I wrote the whole book so I could do that scene where they're talking about space whales. Okay, that was the Flash fiction piece, right? These two guys just discussing space whales, and one of them just being a complete idiot, right? Which it's still in the book, and it's one of my favorite scenes. So it just started from that, and those guys were always characters. But when I started to write the book as a whole, I did start out to write a heist story, and then I failed. I wrote the whole book, and like in the middle while I was writing it, it kind of turned into a mystery. Kind of turned into almost like Planetside. Very similar to that, and to the point where one of my readers said that. He's like, this is just Planetside with different characters, and it was okay. And I turned it into my editor, David Pomerico at Harper Voyager, and he asked me, he's like, "Is this the book you set out to write?" Which is just a horrible question, and it just takes so much guts as an editor to ask that, because he was right. But if he's wrong, you're going to make your writer really sad. But in my case, I was like, you know what? It is not. This is not what I meant to write. Let me go back and write what I meant to write. And then I kind of revised it and made it into the story that it is now, which is much more of a heist story, which is also one of my favorite parts, my favorite types of movies. Like, I love the Sting, Kelly's Heroes. There's a lot of Kelly's Heroes in this. If you're familiar with that old movie from the 70s with Donald Sutherland and Clint Eastwood and a whole bunch of other people. That the idea that they were going to go do something for their own purposes, despite being part of war, that idea kind of came from Kelly's Heroes. So I kind of set out to do it and then got off track, but then circled back around, and I did ultimately, I meant to do that.
Things We Never Got Over, the new book by best-selling author Lucy Score. Bearded bad boy barber Knox refers to live his life the way he takes his coffee, alone, unless you count his basset hound Waylon. Knox doesn't tolerate drama even when it comes in the form of a stranded runaway bride. Naomi wasn't just running away from her wedding, she was riding to the rescue of her estranged twin to Knockemout, Virginia, a rough-around-the-edges town where disputes are settled the old-fashioned way, with fist and beer, usually in that order. Too bad for Naomi, her evil twin hasn't changed at all. After helping herself to Naomi's car and cash, Tina leaves her with something unexpected. The niece Naomi didn't know she had. Now she's stuck in town with no car, no job, no plan, and no home, with an 11-year-old going on 30 to take care of. There's a reason Knox doesn't do complications or high-maintenance women, especially not the romantic ones. But since Naomi's life imploded right in front of him, the least he can do is help her out of her jam. And just as soon as she stops getting into new trouble, he can leave her alone and get back to his peaceful, solitary life. At least that's the plan until the trouble turns to real danger. Things We Never Got Over, the new book by best-selling author Lucy Score. An Innocent Client, the first book in the Joe Dillard legal thriller series. A preacher is found brutally murdered in a Tennessee motel room. A beautiful, mysterious young girl is accused. In this best-selling debut, criminal defense lawyer Joe Dillard has become jaded over the years as he's tried to balance his career against his conscience. Savvy but cynical, Dillard wants to quit doing criminal defense, but he can't resist the chance to represent someone who might actually be innocent. His drug-addicted sister has just been released from prison, and his mother is succumbing to Alzheimer's, but Dillard's commitment to the case never wavers despite the personal troubles and professional demands that threaten to destroy him. Chosen by BookBub readers as one of the top 100 crime novels of all time, get started on this great series with An Innocent Client, where it all started. Read for free with Kindle Unlimited or buy it in paperback or audiobook. An Innocent Client by Scott Pratt. Dabble is a proud sponsor of Author Stories. Dabble is an easy-to-use cloud-based writing tool that gives writers a way to organize, plot, and create amazing stories wherever they are. Write in our desktop app on your Mac or Windows computer, tablet, or mobile device. Dabble syncs your latest version with the cloud on all your devices. Write anywhere and anytime inspiration strikes. We got you. Dabble is my preferred writing tool, and I think it will be yours as well. Visit dabblewriter.com for your free trial.
So in the planning stages of this book, did your pre-writing, of course it probably was different, but what did that look like in the planning of this book versus your three previous books? Knowing kind of what your influences were going in, knowing kind of how you wanted this story to be different. Did that mean a different planning phase?
I am a horrible planner. Like, I try hard. I write I write outlines because I have to sell the book. That's how I sell the book at this point in my career. I send an outline in, and the publisher says, yeah, that's the book we want. And then I do my best to deliver something that's not completely different from the outline. But I usually send it off to my editor thinking, almost wanting to write the note of, hey, this isn't the book you paid for, but I hope you like it. I just, the characters take over for me when I'm writing, and like some of the characters weren't in the outline. I started thinking about it because Gas is the main character. Obviously, he was in the outline, but I kind of started just thinking about it as I'm writing it from his point of view. And it would be like, well, he needs somebody to do this. Well, of course, he's Gas. He's got resources. He knows people. Of course, he's got somebody, right? He's got somebody to do that job. And then I just went about creating that person to fill this need that Gas had. And then giving this person quirks and making them unique. Sometimes reversing some tropes. Like, for instance, their tech guy isn't a nerd, right? He's this giant monster of a man, bodybuilder, and he's the tech guy. Just for fun. And trying to create unique side characters that would be interesting and help move the story, even though they don't have necessarily a huge part.
Michael, we've talked in the past about your military background and your love for science fiction, and we have this subgenre of science fiction, military science fiction, that's wildly popular. As a military science fiction writer, I guess what I'd like to know is, I'm sure you get lots of questions about, how much of the military action is real, and what people that are actively serving, how that's reflected in fiction. But because this is science fiction and it's futuristic science fiction, how do you? I'm trying to think of a way to phrase this. How do you kind of project into the future with Technology and the way things would naturally change as technology evolves?
I hear you.
I'm lacking for words. I apologize.
No, I get what you're saying, because some science fiction does do that and projects the future. I mean, Bradbury is famous for it. Like, a lot of the stuff, if you go back and read Fahrenheit 451, like, he predicted like ATMs. Huge, large screen TVs. So much of the technology that he used is real now. And he wrote about it in the 50s. And there are great authors. There are military science fiction authors who do that really well. Linda Nagata, if you're into that kind of thing, read some of her stuff where she predicts, where it's going. I read it and I'm like, oh yeah, that's how it's going to go. I don't really try to do that. In the Planetside series, I really wrote almost backward tech, right? I mean, a lot of the Planetside series is based on tech that's already in play. And in this one, I do the power armor. I don't think that's where warfare is actually going to go. I just thought it was really cool. You know, so I'm much more about the characters and the interactions between the people in the military and how real those are. And I think for veterans who read it, who read my work and then comment to me, that, you know, one of the greatest comments I get is like, you get it. This is how officers and enlisted actually interact. You know, this is how people actually think in the military and how they actually talk to each other. So those are the parts that I try to make real. I try to make the characters and the interactions real. You know, as ridiculous as some of the characters are in the book that I just wrote in the Misfit Soldier, you know, the book that comes out today, they're real. You know, I didn't base them on real people, but people who have served are going to read this and they're going to go, oh, I knew it got like that.
When one of the great things about a heist novel is the ability to assemble a team of specialists. When you started thinking about the team that you would assemble, did you kind of have skills that you had set aside, and then you cast characters for those? How do you start building out your team?
The hardest part about that was making it fast, in writing, because you can do it in a movie, but when you're writing, the problem you run into, right, is you want to develop each of those characters and you want to have these interactions and you want to show the building of the team because I think it's so cool, but you don't have that many pages to do it because you got to get into the story, right? And if you're building the team for too long, then you're going to slow your story down. So that was really the hardest part about it. But for me, I kind of just started thinking about it from Gas's perspective of, okay, what do I need here? Well, I'm going to need one of these. I'm going to need one of these. I'm going to need a guy who does network stuff. I'm going to need a pilot. I'm going to need, somebody to carry the big guns. I'm going to need a killer because it's still a soldier book, right? So we got Martinez and we got to go find the killer. The guy who's actually going to shoot people. So he just kind of built it from scratch. And then part of it was I wanted to have a certain number, so I kind of threw a couple people in there just to round out the team. So you have a full team, because if you make your team too small, you can't kill anybody. Right. But the fact of the matter is that you can't kill anybody. Everyone who's reading it kind of knows you can't kill anybody. Right. If there's two main characters and they're going into a battle and they're the two people, right? In most stories, you kind of know they're not going to die. And if you know nobody's going to die, it just takes away your ability as the author to create tension, where I can't credibly put people at risk. Right. So when you start this story and it's all told in first person from Gas's point of view, he lives. There's no structure where he dies. It just, as a reader, if you've read a ton of books, that, right? It's told from his point of view. He's telling you this story, so he must be alive, right? You don't know what's happened to him. You don't know how it's worked out for him, whether it's good or bad. He could be in a bad situation, a good situation, but he lives, right? But everybody else is at risk. And the more characters you have, the more viable that risk feels to the reader, I think, because you can see it happening. I just watched the new Reacher show on Amazon, right, where like everybody dies.
Right. That's
and because the author does that, because the writers do that in episode 1 or 2 or 3, people are dying. By the time you get to episode 6, you are afraid for everybody, and that's just good writing.
That is good writing. You're absolutely right. Speaking of which, the Planetside trilogy, because it is a trilogy, and we knew from the beginning that this was going to be a series, there are certain things that as a writer you can and cannot do because you've got to carry this story for 3 books.
Sure.
With the Misfit Soldier being a standalone, and you talked earlier about building that tension and readers kind of knowing who may be safe and who may not be. Was there a certain freedom that comes with knowing that you don't have to carry this through 3 books, that the stakes really are higher?
Yes and no. First, I got to correct something that you said. When I wrote Planetside, I thought it was a standalone. Like, I wrote it to be a standalone book. And then when I signed the contract for it, and Harper immediately told me it was not going to be a standalone book, then well, no, it was okay. I mean, so I kind of opened up it was already a fairly open ending in Planetside, and did not have to adjust that much. But, coming back to write Space Side, I kind of had to think about, like, okay, well, where does this story go? Like, I hadn't really planned it beyond that. Now, writing Space Side, it was different because I did kind of know that there was going to be a 3rd book. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I did not plan that as a series, really. I wrote it as a series of individual books. But then there was still some freeing stuff about this one, knowing that it was going to be a one and done, possibly. The plan is that it's a one and done. I have no plans to write another one. But the other day, I kind of did come up with an outline of how I would write another one if it became something that we wanted to do down the road. I just had so much fun writing it, and I loved the characters, and I had fun with the characters, and I really wouldn't mind doing it again one day when I finish the projects, that I'm working on now. So this would be, in the distant future. But what was fun for me in this was really, I think, writing a completely closed ending. Like, I don't feel like anyone's going to walk away from this book and not have all the answers. I feel like it ends and you really know what happened. And, I didn't leave open threads. I did not leave any way to write a second book. I was able to open it and close it and make a full story. And that was fun. That was fun. But I will figure out a way to open it up again if I need to.
The title of this book, The Misfit Soldier, is interesting to me. One of my sons-in-law just finished basic training and is in tech school right now and in the Air Force. And one thing that basic training especially kind of tries to do is to sand off those individual edges of people so that you don't have misfits and you don't have people that stand out. People work as a team, and the individual is not necessarily exalted above the team. What did the Misfit Soldier, this idea, what was it that appealed to you, and what is it about this character that makes him a misfit?
Well, first off, the idea that you're going to sand those edges off and make everyone conform and it doesn't work. It's a lie. It's a lie. I'm not saying that we don't try.
Yeah.
And obviously you've got to conform people to a certain amount of standard.
Sure.
Right. And you can try, but people have individual personalities and they bring different skills to the team, and that's real. Now, for my story purpose, of course, I exaggerated all that. Right, because that's what makes a good story. You can't, but it's real. In any squad of soldiers in the Army, you got people who are good at different things. You got the one guy who's keeping everybody's mood up just because he's a happy guy, tells jokes, keeps everything light, right? And you don't think of that as a skill, but it really is, right? And everyone just has different personalities and they have to mesh. And I just exaggerate that for the book. The book was originally going to be titled Misfits because they're all misfits, right? The whole team is misfits. Marketing would not allow that because search engine optimization doesn't work real well for that, which is good because there's like a movie that just came out after I wrote the book called The Misfits or Misfits or something like that. And I would have got, I'd have been like 27th on Google, and you don't want that if you're trying to sell books. And ultimately, we all have marketing departments for a reason. They're the ones who make sure that we get to continue writing books because they go out and sell them. So they asked for a different title. And I actually made some changes in the book to kind of reflect that just a little bit when we decided to change the title.
Yeah. Michael, what do you think of the state of science fiction right now? You know, you mentioned Ray Bradbury earlier, and
Sure.
we have kind of these icons of the golden age of science fiction, and some stories that are just still resonating, 30, 40, 50 years later.
Yeah.
And we're in this really interesting renaissance of science fiction and military science fiction where, some really unique stories are coming out, and there's like new life has been breathed into the genre over the last decade or so. Where do you see science fiction, and what are your what do you expect from the genre coming forward?
Yeah, this is such a great question because I have so many feelings on this. Because I'm a person who started reading science fiction, a long time ago. And I'm in my 50s. I'm certainly familiar with all those, foundational works. And I think, and you mentioned a golden age. I think this is the golden age. And I know that's sacrilege to some people who believe in the old masters. And there are people, I've had conversations with people that say, I don't read any science fiction that was written after 1980. And I just stopped talking to them because we don't have anything in common. I read those books, okay? I read those books and I liked them. But now you can find anything you want. When I was a kid, right, there was one bookstore in my town and I read whatever they carried. Between what they carried and the library carried, that defined for me what I was able to read. So I read the books that they carried. Now you have such discoverability, between traditional publishing, which is taking more and more chances with more and more different authors from different backgrounds and bringing in just great new ideas. And if that's not for you and you're not happy with it, there's a million self-published books out there that you can explore. You can find somebody writing literally everything you want. You want to read three tentacled aliens having sex with each other. Somebody wrote it. I don't know where it is and I don't know that book, but somebody did it, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's writing everything and you can find it, and I think that part of our community gets mad about it because that's not science fiction like I know it. But the science fiction like you know it and want it is out there too.
Yeah.
Let everybody have their piece of this great pie.
Yeah.
I love it. I love there's so many different kinds of books and so much different science fiction out there that I spend most of my reading time trying to read new stuff.
Yeah.
Like mostly, and I'll go back and read some of the classics that I've missed. Like if I have holes in my, like I've never read A Canticle for Leibowitz, right? And I need to, and I will this year. It's just one of those books that is foundational that I need to go read because I haven't. And it's a hole in my background that I want to fill. And I'm not saying everybody has to do that. That's just me. That's just, I like to know where we came from. And I like to see where we're going. And then, I like to read debut authors who are doing completely new things. And then, of course, I have my favorites who are working in the business today. Arkady Martine and Essa Hansen are two. N.K. Jemisin, I love. And just these authors that mostly can do things I can't. In their use of the language and their ideas are very different from my own. And I love them because I can't do that, but I can see what they're doing and I see how brilliant it is. And I'm just a huge fan of so many authors. Sorry, I could talk about science fiction for all day. We could have like a whole separate conversation.
I love it. And yeah, I echo what you said. Just because someone is doing something that you don't like does not mean that the thing that you do like is not still available and people still doing, great new innovative things in the genre that you like. This is I think it was Hugh Howey that said several years ago, we're not competing with each other. We're competing with things like YouTube and Facebook and all of that mess that's out there. There are plenty of things that you love out there. You just have to look for it for sure.
Yeah, well, and you're competing now with the fact that the market is so broad that it's hard to stand out. It's hard because there are so many, because everything is available. even in writing. Because there are a million books that people have to choose from, each individual selling enough books to make a living at it becomes very difficult. And that's really the business side of it. So as an author, I kind of wish there were fewer books, and you'd all read mine. But but as a fan, I just love that everything's out there.
The Misfit Soldier, when you're hearing this, is available in Kindle edition and audiobook edition. And I know that a lot of our listeners are huge audiobook listeners, so go grab it immediately. The print edition will be along shortly, because of COVID that we talked about earlier. There are some supply chain issues that's happening with a lot of authors. So that paperback will be along soon, but you can grab it today when you're hearing this in Kindle edition and audiobook. We're going to have links to it in the show notes of this episode. Michael, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, where can they find you online?
I am at Michael Mammay on everything. My webpage is michaelmammay.com. I'm on Twitter at Michael Mammay. I'm on Facebook at Michael Mammay. So I really started my social media presence after I became an author, so I was able to make everything the same.
That's fantastic.
Plus there's only two of me, and there's only two people named Michael Mammay in the United States. So it was easy to get.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to send everyone to see you and to pick up their copy of The Misfit Soldier. Michael, this has been so much fun catching up. Thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show.
Thanks, Hank. I really appreciate it. I like coming here every time.
Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
The brutes of the Andersonville Prison Hospital have moved me to the dead room, or so it has come to be known. None so domiciled have yet left this place. We receive only the smallest rations and only cursory care, to reduce our odors and spare the nostrils of our keepers. The good Christians of the Confederacy do not see any need to provide comfort to those who will soon sleep soundly enough underground. You must know, at least, how your father came to such an end. At Doctortown, Kilpatrick entrusted me with the conquest of a railroad trestle, and my bummers, my demolition team, acquitted themselves admirably thanks to my ingenuity with powder. We successfully destroyed the trestle work past Morgan's Lake. This would prove to be my entire contribution to the war. Federal troops were unable to capture the bridge or overcome the enemy's battery. Kilpatrick withdrew, and my bummers and I found ourselves on the wrong side of the Altamaha River, behind the enemy line with no hope of reaching our encampment. Rebels accosted us, taking our remaining supplies. We escaped and headed south, hoping by a long march to reach Seymour's forces in Jacksonville, but we encountered other rebel encampments at Jessup. 4 of my men were lost to gunfire. We marched west, then south again, barely evading capture. We had no choice but to brave the great swamp Okefenokee. Oh, on and on it goes, in every direction, endlessly. We trudged through miles of grasping mud and noxious rot, pursued by hunger and the mosquito, scratching at our arms and faces until all our skin was scourged. We lived off alligator meat at first, then nothing at all. My men grew mutinous, blamed me for all their misfortunes, threatened to throw me in a sack, weigh me down with stones, and sink my body. Yet was I not equally hungry? Did I not starve? I grew weary of their endless insubordination and contempt. Finally, they took hold of me and swore they would hang me by the neck for leading them to ruin. They were 5 in number, younger than I and more muscular. I was no match for them physically. They laid their hands on me, and I burned them. I burned those men. The flame rose from me as from a volcano, stripping the skin from those boys, blackening their faces, roasting their flesh. And let this be my final ghastly confession. I feasted that night, feasted on the meat of my prospective murderers. And that is how I survived. I staggered alone from that swamp, a mad thing, fueled by outrage and guilt. I saw an encampment of rebel soldiers and surrendered myself gladly. They say in Andersonville prison all men are brothers, equal in filth, equal in terror, equal in ruin. Yet I feel I may claim some small distinction, at least. For I am surely damned to a greater extent than any here.